A study went to a supermarket in the UK, bought all of the meat in the entire supermarket, went back, tested it all, 38% of it had toxo in it. So what happens though, if you cook meat, you'll be fine. But raw meat, i.e. the French guy steak tartare, the Brazilian barbecue, that type of thing, raw meat is how most people actually get toxo. What does this mean? Well, up to 2 billion people, about a third of people on this planet, have toxo in their brains. And this is a heat map of every statistic that we know of, every country that's had toxo testing. And you can see some of these countries, it's ridiculous. Brazil, 60%. France is somewhere between 50 and 60. Again, they're cultures that encourage you to eat raw meat. And this is probably where these cultures are picking up a lot of this parasite. But if you'll notice, US, 20%, which means 40 people in this room have it, if there are 200, right? And even countries that have very, very little and low amounts of toxo at least have 10%. That's a ridiculously high amount of people in this planet that actually have this parasite. So given all the evidence that we've seen before, okay, it can increase dopamine, giving it an antipsychotic can actually reverse the behavior, this type of thing, it made sense to look at, well, is this related to any kind of psychotic behavior in humans? So people have looked at 2 particular mental illnesses, schizophrenia and obsessive compulsive disorder, and looked and said, if you have these mental illnesses, are you more likely to have toxo? This is because both of those are known to be associated with increases in dopamine. So every study that's looked has found that yes, if you have schizophrenia, if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, you are more likely to have toxo. So what does this mean? This is combining 2 universalities. 1, there are about 2 billion people in the world that have toxo. 2, there are crazy cat ladies in every country in the world. Right? This can't be a coincidence. So first, though, I'm going to tell you a story about a crazy cat man, just so as to not be gender biased. This is Louis Wayne, commonly known as, well, commonly his old nickname was the man who drew cats. So he started off drawing pretty normal-looking cats, doing normal-looking cat things, like, you know, drinking coffee and going for a walk on the boardwalk and boating, having a fever, very normal cat things. So he was the president of the National Cat Society, and he lived at times, he had the reputation of being someone who would take in a lot of stray cats, so he sometimes lived with up to 40. And no claim to cause and effect, but he went schizophrenic eventually. You can fill in the pieces. And we can see some interesting things. He was an artist, right? So we can see some interesting things with his work. So first, starts off, I mean, normal looking cat, a little paranoid with something that's happening off screen, but like that's totally normal. Flowers for eyes. That happens, that I mean, right? Cats, they have, okay, there are some lines coming out of the bodies, of the, you know, like the boundary between self and non-self is a little blurred, but I mean, cats get angry sometimes, right? That's totally normal. Okay, so the lines coming out of the body are colored. That's totally fine. And red eyes, I mean, cats sometimes don't get enough sleep. They get, you know, red eyes. Like, this is still completely normal. Kind of plant-like, but I mean, we all came from plants, right? I mean, eventually some photosynthetic single cell, it's totally fine. All right. Honestly, this looks more like an owl to me than a cat, but I think it has all the cat features, for instance, 2 eyes, 2 ears. So this is where, if I think you're Louis Wayne's friend, you start to get a little worried about him. Because things just, you don't really even know what to recognize anymore. So this I actually really, he's really doing well with the symmetry thing. And I mean, cats are symmetrical. It's like, it's any organism with neural tissue has bilateral symmetry. Like this is, you know, it's biologically accurate, that's fine. It just kind of ends in something that I don't think is interpretable. So this is the progression. This is the progression of his work, his art, as he goes schizophrenic. And this could potentially be something very interesting, right? Like, what is the pathology? Is art often dominated by these types of things?
I want to be a lawyer and a doctor because a woman can do anything.
At 24, Eleanor had graduated from Harvard Medical and Yale Law.
Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance so I can go deliver a baby.
I love babies. I'll allow it.
I'm a little burnt out. So, sometimes, don't shoot me. I have a glass of wine with Buster here. He's a real comfort. I might even get a second cat.
Nice kitty.
And I know what you're thinking. Oh, okay, he's pulling the wool over curtain over my eyes or whatever. You know, that's just a cartoon. This isn't science. That's not real. This doesn't happen to real people with real problems.
Most of us have heard the story of 101 Dalmatians, but can you imagine sharing a tiny 3-room apartment with 136 cats? Feeding time causes a great deal of excitement, and individual bowls just aren't an option. It's something of a feline free-for-all. It's the life Nina Alexandrovna has made for herself in Novosibirsk in North Russia. They're all waifs and strays that would be trying to survive on the streets if it wasn't for her kindness. And it all began 15 years ago when, as a student, she was persuaded to share her dormitory with an abandoned kitten.
Make sure to
And when she got her own apartment, she decided to help more and more.
The ball began rolling. I was not afraid of hard work. Each time I met a stray or abandoned cat, I felt sorry for it and gave it refuge. I was well off at that time. I've always been very sorry for stray cats, which are so miserable, especially in the winter.
This is the youngest addition to the family, left on the doorstep, as word has spread of the informal refuge Nina has created in her home.
Many people don't keep cats or dogs, and people like me have to take care of many animals. I wish people were more compassionate and considerate to animals, and adopted more stray cats and dogs.
So, a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine a world without cats. What would this look like? Would we have maybe less crazy cat ladies? Probably, by definition. Would we have Louis Wayne? Would he have gone schizophrenic? Would we have drawings of cats, much like how we don't have very few drawings of these things, which don't exist? But I want to go slightly deeper and ask some deeper questions. Would we have existentialism? Would we have masculinity? Would I have been able to include this slide 3 slides ago? Would my neighbor Christian have had a great night in Paris in the 1940s? Would horror, writing as we know it, be the same? Would we have spirituality? Would we have idea and not character-driven science fiction? Would we have beat poetry, beat writers? Would we have dystopias? Would we have summer reading lists? Would we have hipsters? Would we have satire? So this cat is actually particular. It can play pool, apparently. I don't know if you guys know that. Would we have modern American poetry as we know it? And so what I'm really interested in, I also study mental illness to some degree, and so what I'm really interested in is whether or not we can actually retroactively take these artistic outputs and actually interpret them as behavior. So there's a great study looking at comparing suicidal poets versus non-suicidal poets, asking if we look at the frequency with which they use every word possible in their entire body of work, can we detect patterns? Are suicidal poets more likely to talk about death, more likely to talk about melancholia, more likely to talk about sex or something like that? It turns out that the suicidal poets are more likely to use one word, I. And so these are tag clouds of some of Sylvia Plath's poems, right? This is this behavior. Can we actually, if we get the right algorithm, look back and retroactively diagnose people with certain types of illnesses? Can we look at some of Louis Wayne's paintings and say, yes, this man was schizophrenic? If I tell you that on the upper right, there's a man, Adolf Wolfli, drew this painting, could you say that he has any type of mental illness? What if I told you that he has thousands of them, and they're exactly the same, and he did it over the course of decades? Would you then want to be able to say that, yes, maybe some of these things are patterns, and that we can retroactively diagnose certain things? Is it a coincidence that a third of schizophrenics hear the voice of God? And if we actually look back it's incredibly hard to distinguish between a lot of these schizophrenic artists and a lot of religious art. How far back can we go when we do this? So if we go back to ancient Egypt, this is a small animation looking at the domestication of plants. So we domesticated plants. We started using living things as tools, and this had unintended consequences. We started having to keep our grain somewhere, and when you do that, you are likely to get little rodents and rodent infestations. What this means is that approximately 11,000 years ago, we started to invite cats. And we started to invite cats to be our friends, and we kept them around because they took care of the rodent problem. And the question is, did this have unintended consequences? Was this 11,000 years ago the first time maybe that humans were introduced to toxo? So, a quick reminder, the life cycle, how humans get it. You get it from eating raw meat, and you get it from cat shit, right? So, another thought experiment. I want you to imagine how you would create a society of cat worshippers. Just imagine, knowing what you do about the life cycle, knowing what you do about humans get it, how would you do that? You can look, you can cheat. You can look at an ancient Egyptian medical text and see what they do, see what they prescribe. So, for the treatment of an open head wound, you have to bandage him with raw meat the first day and treat him afterwards. For the treatment of a gaping head wound, you have to bandage him with raw meat the first day and treat him afterwards. This used to be therapeutic. People thought there were enzymes and things that parasites would actually come out of the body and go into the raw meat. General care. The fat, fur, and excrements of a male cat were used in medicine, while the placenta and the fur would be used from a female cat. A female cat's fur in combination with human milk and resin could be applied to the skin to soothe burns. Feline resin would be used in the lotion to keep the hair from turning gray. So, imagine yourself, you have 3 uncontrollable problems. You go to your doctor, you have a burn, you have a cut, you're graying, right? He covers your hair in cat shit. He puts raw meat on the open wound and then covers your burn in cat shit. And you go home and you don't have a germ theory of disease, so you've never washed your hands in your entire life. And you know, your wife hands you some bread and you eat your bread and you like put your hand through your luscious new black hair and you get toxo. This is exactly how you would do it. So can we actually detect toxo in these old mummies? Mummification, the process itself, actually preserves soft tissue. So you can actually go back and look and find DNA fragments. We could potentially find fragments of the toxo DNA. But what we're interested in, of course, is whether or not ancient Egyptians as a people had toxo in their brains. To do that, we're going to need some brains. But unfortunately, to mummify properly, they take out the brains, right? This is like, fuck, what do you do? Luckily, I don't want to give away all my secrets, but mummification is a process that takes place over thousands and thousands of years. And this is a process that was kind of the privilege of the wealthy and the royalty. And when you have something like that that has religious overtones, you're going to get a black market. So there's actually, for the poor, right? There's actually a really robust black market in mummification where they would wrap the body up and all the like normal accoutrement and everything, but they wouldn't actually take out the brains. So there are some mummies out there that have the brains. And if we can detect something like that, and if we can find these mummies, we can do science on them. So King Tut, it was recently discovered, died or had at his death advanced onset malaria. And the reason we know that is because we can use this process, detect soft tissue, find the DNA of Plasmodium falciparum, which is a related parasite to toxo, and should this story all converge, we might finally be able to prove that Cleopatra was the archetypal crazy cat lady. And that's it.